On this episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, we interview speakers and the leadership during the 12th Annual Ambulatory Surgery Conference for the New Jersey Association of Ambulatory Surgery Centers that was held in East Brunswick, New Jersey on June 8, 2022.
Welcome to the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, the longest-running podcast specifically focused on the freestanding ambulatory surgery industry. We would like to thank our sponsors, Surgical Information Systems, providing cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable data insights. And Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, please visit our website at ascpodcast.com.
Welcome to episode 162 of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle for July 24th, 2022. We're recording from the 12th Annual Ambulatory Surgery Conference for the New Jersey Association of Ambulatory Surgery Centers in East Brunswick, New Jersey, and from our studio in Spencerport, New York. This is Sue Cronkite, Chief Researcher for the ASC Podcast with John Goehle and Senior Nurse Consultant for Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. Just a reminder, the ASC regulatory environment is extremely dynamic, and the material provided in this episode is based on information that was available as of the date of the recording. Joining me is John Goehle, the owner of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, and recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in the ambulatory surgery industry. Mr. Goehle is the author of over 10 books on the ASC industry, and he is a frequent industry speaker on regulatory accreditation and finance issues.
So we are a little bit late in getting this episode out. It was indeed recorded over a month ago on June 7th through 8th, 2022 in New Jersey. I had the privilege of being there with Tony Lyons, one of my colleagues here at Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. Sue, you were at home taking care of some puppies, I believe,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I was.
So obviously it's been a very busy month for us, and we apologize for taking some time to get this recorded. A little bit about the conference. Obviously, it's the 12th annual conference, as we mentioned. I did two sessions. I had planned on doing one for succession planning when you didn't plan for it. It's kind of a funny topic title that I created there. And then, unfortunately, my colleague, Ann Geyer, who was scheduled to do a session on how to successfully and effectively staff your ASC, was unexpectedly out of the country and not able to get back to do that session. So I covered her for that. I take no credit, and I take all the blame for anything that was not said appropriately during that session. But it did go over very well, and Ann always creates wonderful slides, so it was pretty easy for me to do that session for her. I had a lot of fun. It was a great conference. Began, as it usually does, by the way, with a casino night on June 7th. So everybody got together the night before, did a casino night where they had an opportunity to go around and see all the vendors. And we had a booth there for Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies and the podcast. There were lots of prizes for people that attended it. And I really had a great time, Sue, with all the vendors. Tony, who is new to the New Jersey conference, also had an opportunity to get around and see people. So I really do encourage, people in New Jersey, vendors to frequent this organization because you really do get some great throughput, as well as an opportunity for the attendees not only to get great content, but to meet with vendors that are very attentive to our industry. It was the agenda was a unique setup with a novice and an expert track, and there were many crossovers, and there really was a lot of good interaction. By the way, Sue, in the two sessions I did with our podcast audience, and I did have an opportunity to meet quite a number of our listeners during that conference here. So, and just as we've said before, we always love the feedback that we get, and we try to use that when we're putting together sessions. Matter of fact, the next episode that we're going to do, 163, is actually going to be on one of the topics that was brought up by one of our attendees. So I just wanted to run through the different sessions that they had during the conference, and then we're going to do some interviews with three people from the conference. The first session was a joint session called Proven Strategies to Help Your Business Maximize Your People, Minimize Your Risk, and Streamline Your Processes. And the speaker was Mike Ross, who I did have an opportunity to interview. It was a great session I was able to attend myself, talking about human resources issues. And then at 9 o'clock, they had a Future of Healthcare Impact of ASCs, and the speaker was Dan Tassett, who is the chairman and founder of Nuterra Capital Value Health and New Health. And again, I had an opportunity. I actually know Dan, and I had an opportunity to interview him, and you'll hear that interview a little bit later.
Okay, and the next one at right around 10 o'clock was the one where you ended up filling in for Ann, right? How to successfully and effectively staff your ASC.
And we're going to do a session. We're going to try to get Ann on for one of our podcasts here, because it was a great topic to talk about and very well attended because, of course, everybody had all kinds of questions about it. And then at 11:15, what technology should ASCs implement in their ASC? They were talking about EMR, tracker boards, texting families, patients, staff. Also talking about some of that UV cleaning materials and even the robots there. And our dear friend Darren Smith from Surgical Information Systems, who is interviewed at least once, sometimes twice a year here on the podcast, did that session.
And a little after 1, your ASC is a victim of a cyber attack, setting up a disaster recovery plan. Ask the experts. It was a question and answer forum, and the speakers were Chris Dutra.
Right, who's been on our podcast. We actually tried to get an interview with him and unfortunately ran out of time to do that. And of course, our good friend, Nelson Gomes, who actually I don't think was there, come to think of it. I just thinking about that. And Craig Leahy was there from Surgical Information Systems. But Nelson was supposed to speak. I don't know who replaced him. And then at 1:45, I did the session on succession planning. When you didn't plan for it. So we'll try to get that topic in. I've done it at a couple state association meetings. I'll try to get that topic in for one of our future podcasts.
And the last session on the expert track, right around 3 o'clock, was a joint session, Ask the Experts, and it had several speakers from both the state and the New Jersey Association.
And then the novice track was running parallel, so there were some sessions that were only for people that went on that track as well as those joint ones. And the first one was switching from paper charts to electronic charting, and the speaker was Maura Cash, who was the Vice President of Clinical Strategies for HST Pathways.
Then after that, integrating life safety with the Quality Assurance Program. That could be an interesting one.
Yeah, it is. And Deborah, it was by Deborah Comerford, who is a good friend of mine, and I actually didn't see her down there, so we really should try to get her on the conference. And then creating meaningful quality improvement in your facility, and the speaker was Claire Cerami, and she's with Positive Outcomes Consulting.
And then regulatory compliance of surgical instruments and transportation. That was by Melissa McVaugh from Standardized Sterilization Concepts.
And that was pretty much the conference. So we wanted to mention all of those sessions so that people got an idea of the types of sessions that were at the conference. Excellent conference again, and I really encourage you to go to the New Jersey website. We'll put a link in the show notes here so that you can check up on the upcoming conferences there.
Now that you know what you missed, maybe you'll try to get there the next time, because it looks like a lot of interesting topics were covered.
And, I always have a lot of fun with the New Jersey Association. There's a lot of great state conferences that invite us to go to them and do podcasts from. So I do want to thank everybody there for their patience with us. And we brought a full studio with us, and that was a lot of fun setting that up. And obviously we had to work around their schedule. So again, thank you to everybody who helped us during that conference. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to have 3 interviews that we did during the conference. The ASC Podcast with John Goehle and our virtual conferences would not be possible without the support of our sponsors and patrons. Our goal with this podcast is to help busy ASC executives and staff to keep up with the latest news, learn how to remain compliant with regulations and accreditation standards, and to provide opportunities for ASC leaders to advance in their careers. All of this, of course, costs money, and without our sponsor partners and our patrons, we would not be able to provide this service. Surgical Information Systems was an early sponsor that leads the industry with their software solutions. SIS's mission is to deliver solutions and services that help surgery providers, regardless of care setting, improve their organization so they can deliver the highest level of care to their patients. For more information, visit their website at sisfirst.com. Our newest sponsor is Trivalence. The Trivalence solution is focused on removing waste from the healthcare payments ecosystem by creating the next generation, data-driven supply chain automation and payment optimization portal and infrastructure, saving countless hours, administrative costs, and allowing for scale. For more information, visit trivalence.com. That's TRIVALENCE.com. Our oldest sponsor, Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, is the nation's leader in outsourced regulatory and accreditation oversight. Busy administrators, nurse managers, and medical directors simply don't have the time to keep up with the constantly changing regulatory environment and the requirements of the conditions for coverage and accreditation organizations. AHS helps you to remain compliant for a reasonable fixed monthly fee so you and your staff can focus on taking care of your patients. For more information, visit ah-strategies.com. And last but certainly not least, our patrons. For a reasonable monthly cost, our patrons support the podcast while receiving access to a database of important information, such as policies, forms, drills, and education programs, as well as the ability to meet weekly via Zoom with each other and the staff of the ASC Podcast. Visit ascpodcast.com for more information. And our first session was entitled The Future of Healthcare, Impact to ASCs. And the speaker was our friend Dan Tassett. He's the chairman and founder of Nuterra Capital, Value Health, and New Health. Let's listen to the interview. This is John Goehle. I'm here at the New Jersey Association meeting in June of 2022, and I'm here with Dan Tassett, who has been on the podcast before. And
good to see you again.
Same here. You just finished a nice presentation. Unfortunately, I was interviewing somebody else during your presentation, but before we turned the recorder on, we were talking a little bit about your passion and the message you're trying to get across. So things are changing in our industry.
They are.
And we've gone through a huge transformation, and truthfully, we can blame part of it on the pandemic, of course, but truthfully, those things were happening before the pandemic occurred and are just escalating now. Can you talk a little bit about how our industry is transforming and how our surgery centers need to transform themselves, to be prepared for the future?
Yeah, I think there's two major things, and I think both of them were prompted by the passage of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. And those two things are really the onset of consumerism, like other industries have really ongoing, whether it's Amazon in the consumer goods industry, whether it's iTunes in the music industry, Netflix, Uber, all of this is undergoing this transformation into a consumer-driven product as opposed to healthcare in the past has always been a provider-driven product. So that transformation is underway. And then, of course, payment reform, what people call value-based care, the shift away from fee-for-service to value-based care, a term everybody uses, but not very few people try to define.
Right.
So that's where the industry is going with those two major drivers of industry change.
Well, and I think that, for so long we have lived in a world, we as surgery centers have lived in a world, and in hospitals too, where we've let the physician, in our case, the surgeon, drive the business. We let our anesthesiologist drive the business. And we've spent more time taking care of the doctor than we have, the patient, in terms of recognizing the importance of catering to their needs and attracting them to our center. So just talk a little bit about how that change is going to, how it's going to manifest itself in payer reform in the future.
Yeah, let me use another industry analog, if I could, for a minute. I'll just pull iTunes off the table. I could give you a whole bunch of them, but I remember when the whole concept of iTunes started to come out, that the musicians were kind of up in arms against it, saying, there's no way I'm going to sell music for a song for $1. You got to go buy the entire album, even though you only want one song on the whole album. And I remember Bono with U2 saying, I will never sell a song for $1. And within 2 years, he was on stage when they announced the iPhone 5 or whatever. And so if the analogy that you drive is that The consumer of music wanted it a certain way, and iTunes developed a platform or an interface that the consumer could get it the way they wanted.
Right.
And the analogy would be that Bono with U2 is really the provider of music, just like we have physicians are the provider of healthcare. Today, the provider and the physicians are really driving how healthcare is done. But in the future, that's going to switch. And in my opinion, that change is happening at lightning speed. So it's going to be patient-centered, consumer-centered healthcare, not provider-centered, around the convenience of the physician. It's going to be centered around the patient and the consumer themselves, those that pay for healthcare.
So what is that going to mean for a center? And you and your company, of course, own a lot of surgery centers across the country. What's 150? Yeah.
And a lot of technology-based companies around to make this transformation happen.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how the average surgery center, and of course most of our listeners tend to be, it's always hard to determine exactly who's listening to us, but we know that the podcast tends to attract people that are in smaller centers who are going to have a difficult time with that transition. So how does that group of people, get themselves ready for the future? What are they going to have to do in order to be prepared for this consumer-driven care?
Yeah, there's a whole list of things. So if you kind of think about what do I need to prepare for the future, I would probably look at maybe three things. There's a whole bunch more, but let me categorize it into three things and at highest of priority. Number one is you have to start thinking about what is it that I'm going to be doing to really change the way healthcare is consumed and paid for. So if I think about moving away from fee-for-service into value-based care, meaning I have to take some responsibility for the product that I'm delivering, means I have to take some risk.
Right.
So if you go back to any other product or service, go back to probably most of the listeners here don't even remember Lee Iacocca in the automobile industry, but as he revolutionized the automobile industry with a warranty behind the automobile, it changed everything in the future and how things were done.
Yeah.
I think healthcare and surgical care in particular is moving towards that and moving there very quickly. It's all in many states. It's already there. So
similar to your move centers, for example, which we've talked about on the podcast. I visited one of your move centers. About 6 months ago. I talked about it on one of the podcasts and how impressed I was with that. Yeah. But that's a good example of how you guarantee.
Right. So you have to guarantee that product. Meaning, if you have to go back in and do another surgical procedure over again, you're going to have, if it's an avoidable complication, where the patient has to go into the emergency room or has an infection or whatever that might be, then you have to stand behind that product. That's where it's going. So if you think about that, you're saying, well, that risk could be a really big number. And if I'm going to manage that risk, I probably need to go to think about a little bit about a reinsurance to stand behind that risk. I can't get reinsurance without some sort of underwriting process. You can't underwrite it without data to underwrite it with, and you can't capture the data without technology. So the number one thing that I'm trying to impress upon this, which sounds like a little bit of a complicated dissertation, is you have to be very technology driven to a degree that you've never done before. This goes way beyond having an EMR. It goes beyond capturing every piece of the clinical journey, the clinical pathway, before surgery, during surgery, after surgery. It's got to be data-driven, and you cannot capture that data without technology. So number one is to prepare yourself, back to your question, to prepare for the future. You've got to be thinking about technology in a whole new way that you've never thought about it before.
And you got to be very careful about what technology platform you jump onto to make sure that they're going to be around tomorrow, and they're going to be able to provide that data in a way that can be analyzed and given to the organizations that might be parsing.
And being around tomorrow means it must be able to interface with other technology platforms. So it can't be using an antiquated type of a platform.
Well, and I think that's one of the things I've seen, even though our company doesn't do a lot of startups. We've done a lot of startups in the last 6 years, actually, as a result of just the demand, for it. And I find many of these new organizations make poor decisions in the beginning because they get captured by a company that might not be very well known because they haven't been in the industry. They don't know the major players. And then they end up spending an enormous amount of money switching from one system to another. And then often they don't make the good decision the second time around either. And they end up with, a third round of it in order to end up with a system that's going to be able to take them into the next generation.
And the problem with where we are today is we're seeing progress with some of the information systems that are out there. that the type of data capture that we need in the future is much different than the way we look at it in the past. And let me give you an example. I'll go back to the automobile industry for a minute. In the automobile insurance industry, the way insurance on your automobile was underwritten in the past is you would say, if you have kids, boys in particular, what are their grades in school? And that's the way the automobile industry would underwrite. If they had good grades, they thought it correlated to less chance of accidents.
Yeah.
Today, that's an old school. It's an old way of doing it, and very few insurance companies, do that anymore. What they do is they use technology, GPS technology on your iPhone, and they have you study your driving patterns, how often do you brake, change lanes, all of that. And then they underwrite your premium for your automobile insurance. Well, healthcare is the same way, in particular a surgery center is the same way. If you have EMR as opposed to paper records, you may think, well, I'm technology based. That's the bare minimum. What you have to be able to do is say, how many minutes was the patient in the OR? Not only how long were they in the OR, but how long was the tourniquet on? How quickly did they ambulate and pack you? How far did they ambulate and pack you? How far did they ambulate day 2? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So beyond what we would typically say, what are the clinical infection rates, return to the OR, all those standard things we keep track of, it's much more complex and detailed than that. And so it may take a combination of companies, technology companies, that will interact with each other for them to be able to prepare to capture the data that they need to really be able to manage risk on a go-forward basis.
It seems to me, of course, one of the things that we're passionate about in the podcast and within Amateur Healthcare Strategies is quality assurance, performance improvement projects, the process itself. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, so many of our doctors, the owners of the surgery centers, think that that's just paperwork. It's just a process that you have to do in order to pass the survey. And as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, this is the reason, in the future, they're going to have to be thinking about that process to make sure that they're reducing their risk so that they're going to look attractive to those insurance companies that are providing that reinsurance and making sure they have the data to be able to, to pump into that EMR system to show that, significant improvement in their operations. Taking those things, not just filling out the incident report and not just closing the loop on the incident that occurred, but identifying opportunities for improvement so that you have less of a chance of ending up having to use your reinsurance.
Right. That old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, is more real than ever today, and it's going to be even more real tomorrow and in the future. So when you think about you can't manage what you don't measure, the things that we should be measuring, to simplify it, are 3 things that tie into what we call the value equation. They are clinical quality, all the things that I was just talking about before, and everything associated with that. Details what happens in the ER, tourniquet time, ambulation, net promoter score, patient satisfaction, and cost. And so if you don't measure every single detail associated with that, you will never be able to improve the value. Forget about price transparency, forget about quality transparency. It's value transparency. It's all of the above. If you don't measure those, you can't manage and improve them. Back to your point, performance improvement goes way, way beyond even how we think about it today. And most people think you just call it out. They think it's a bunch of paperwork. It's unnecessary. It's 100% opposite of that.
Well, and again, we're probably speaking to the choir. I don't know how many doctors actually listen to the podcast, to be honest with you here. But I know that we have a lot of administrators and nurse managers, of course, that get into it. But they need, as they're trying to get their doctors more involved in the quality improvement process, take it more seriously. This is the argument that you can have. So that's my message out here, is that listen to what you're talking about. In the future, those doctors are going to come back and say, how do I prove these numbers? Well, we've got the information. We just need to put it in a format that can be shared outside the organization in electronic format. We just can't keep it all on paper like most of us are doing still, even in today's environment. So you got to develop a good system.
I think there's another point that you need to make here in terms of the data and keeping track of quality improvement. I often hear from physicians in particular that those that pay for health care really don't care about quality. And that's absolutely not true. What they really care about, they care about your willingness to stand behind your product or your service or your surgery. So they care about quality if you'll stand behind it. In other words, if you'll guarantee the results of what they're doing, they certainly care about quality. They also care about the satisfaction of their insured or their employees if they're self-funded. And, of course, they care about the cost. And so that to be able to think about all those measures and data measurements point to continue to make improvements on every one of those. In other words, to improve the numerator on value, which is clinical quality and patient satisfaction, and lower the denominator, which is cost. Those are absolutely important.
Dan, as always, it's great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
And our second interview was with Mike Ross, the Director of Innovation and Development at Insperity. And he talked about 9 proven strategies to help your business maximize your people, minimize your risk, and streamline your processes.
So this is John Goehle here at the New Jersey Association meeting in June of 2020, and I'm here with Mike Ross with Insperity. Mike just finished a presentation on human resources. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his presentation and just some observation about what's going on in human resources. And Insperity is a PEO. You're going to have to remind me, what does PEO stand for?
Professional Employer.
There, thank you.
No, you're good.
I forgot about it. So, this is a tough time right now with human resources, and it's been very, staffing has been difficult, managing the human resources department. Of course, all of the legal issues that have surrounded COVID, and even before COVID. I mean, COVID isn't the only driving factor or driving problem that we have in the human resources side. So, tell me a little bit about your presentation and what your focus was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, even before jumping in, I'll just build off of that last comment that you made. We have seen, in the HR industry, it's what we study it, we eat and drink it, right? And what we have seen is that these last couple of years have really helped. I guess in one way, it's helped us educate those about HR, but it has really shown a positive light, right? HR used to just be seen as, we're the compliance people. We're going to come in, we're going to make sure you do your annual training, you're going to sign here, you're going to sign here, we're going to update the employee handbook as needed, and we'll throw the corporate picnic once a year.
Yeah, right.
That was kind of what everyone thought HR was. And it really has been a tough couple of years. Just with, how do we lead people? How do we motivate people? If we're sending people home and they're no longer in the office and they're working remote, how do we know they're being productive? Or how do we instill our culture remotely? And it's different by industry. Some industries, they laugh. They said, well, you sent people home? We couldn't. We aren't a business that functions that way. Or we are a business that 50% could work from home, or just office staff could work from home, but others had to be in present. And so, it's been very interesting to see what challenges businesses have, but it's been very clear every business has been challenged. And they've all kind of come back to, our leadership skills aren't what we thought they were, our systems aren't what we thought they were, and just our confidence in making sure we're taking care of our people isn't as good as we thought it was. And so that is a lot of what we talked about today. My presentation focused, we pulled content from a book that our CEO wrote called Take Care of Your People. And in there he outlines 9 core strategies, proven strategies for helping to run your business, helping to maximize your people, streamline your processes, and minimize your risk. And so I pulled those strategies out, and that's what we talked about today. But then I also, in there, he has a bonus strategy, a 10th strategy, which is faith and optimism at work. And so we talked about that as well. What does it mean to have that faith and optimism? And a lot of that might be more of a leadership trait. How are you leading? How are you envisioning your company? How are you inspiring your employees? But I think it also comes down to the employees. Do they believe in themselves, and do they believe in their employees, right? Do your internal leaders at all levels believe in their employees? And so that was, a lot of what we talked about today.
Well, I think leadership is a big issue. We've been talking about a lot on the podcast, and of course, some of our virtual conferences lately have been focusing on building leadership skills for administrators and for the nurse managers. And you pointed that out very well. Is that it really brought to the forefront the importance of that, of motivating people. We're no longer in the mode where we can just treat our employees as commodities. We have to keep them happy. We have to keep them from leaving, because there's so many other opportunities for them.
And one of the big trends that we're seeing now too is it's hard to find employees.
Yeah.
And that's nationwide. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's
and it's not just nurses,
right?
now.
It's agnostic to the industries, right?
Yeah.
So those that have always been challenged by that are saying, "Welcome to our world."
Yeah.
But then even they're seeing an elevated, area of challenge. But a trend that we're seeing is that a lot of individuals or a lot of organizations have found that they will promote up because it's easier to hire in at lower levels, and that comes with a lot of being intentional.
Yeah.
If you just promote people up because, you were here the longest, then you may be setting that employee up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
I talked earlier today about the Peter principle, and it's a business principle that says you will promote people to their level of incompetence, right? Yeah. You're doing well at this role, I'm going to promote you. You're doing well at that role, I'll promote you. And as soon as you're just doing mediocre, I stop promoting you. Well, what happens then is you fill your organization with what many believe is just mediocre employees.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have mediocre employees. You have amazing employees that are mediocre at the role they're in. So what can you do as an organization to develop them, to upskill them, to prepare them for that next role, or get them in the role where they really feel that they can be successful and that you can get that full value and potential out of them.
It's so funny you should bring that up. At 1:30, I'm doing a session on succession planning, which is exactly that whole conversation.
Yes.
How do you prepare? How do you and your point is extremely important, right? The importance of identifying people, moving them through your ranks, mentoring them, providing them resources, sending them to the appropriate training, so that the Peter principle doesn't kick in. In other words, don't assume that they're going to be able to learn that on their own, that they're given those skills.
Yeah.
So you talk about the 9.
Yeah, the 9 core strategies. So let me, I'll go real quick and just say what the 9 are, and then that way, if there's one we could dive into.
Sure.
So the first one was getting your culture right, and it's really focusing on, who we are, and we warn people, you're going to have a culture. Mm-hmm. It's better to have one by design than by default.
Yeah.
And if you're not being purposeful and designing it, it's going to just create one, and you will have, there will never be a void of culture. There will be a culture.
Yeah.
We always say, go back to those core values. Your culture needs to represent your values, and your values need to really drive the organization, so that when tough times come, you can go back to those values and not just, as I called it earlier today, flavor of the month.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got a new this, let's try it. Hey, we've got a new that, let's try it.
Comes down to strategic planning. By the way, that's another thing I do a lot of speeches on is strategic planning. It's just so funny that that so much of what we have been talking about here really fits into the whole message about how we treat our personnel.
Absolutely. And that was, all of these strategies come from this, our story. It's the Insperity story, and it's not the Insperity sales pitch.
Yeah.
It's the Insperity story. I'm a terrible Insperity sales rep. I don't know our product well enough to be able to sell it. But what I do know is the Insperity story, and that is that at every inflection point our business had, we pulled back to our core and said, how do we as Insperity address this challenge? And then we would move forward. And if that meant adopting new processes and solutions and services, we would do that. But if it meant scrapping and moving a completely different direction, we would do that. We would continue to reinvent ourselves. And that's where we identified these, and that's the Insperity way. We will continue to reinvent ourselves, and that's what we challenge any business is don't get stagnant.
Yeah.
Look at how you can reinvent yourselves. Look at how you can get the most out of your people.
And of course, in an ASC, the quality improvement process is ideal for that type. I mean, there's actually a built-in and regulatorily required process that you can call upon to be able to do exactly what you're talking about.
And I love that. And that was some of the stuff that I think really resonated from my discussion earlier today was our CEO, Paul Sarvati, always says, I love bringing in new people to the organization because with every new hire, we have just improved and changed the trajectory and the potential of our organization.
Yeah.
And it's so true. The people that you bring into your business, you're going out there and you're working hard to find the brightest, the smartest, the hardest working, the most motivated. They align with your culture. Don't just put them in a little box and only give them limited information or say, this is your job duty only, right? So that, as you were just talking, that whether it's required in the industry or not, it's just good business to get the most out of your people, to develop them and grow them, because they are the potential of your organization.
Right.
It's only through the people that you have and how you treat them and how you grow them that you're really going to be able to take your organization to the next level and again and again.
I just wish we could get this message across to our owners and the physicians that don't, because, we're talking to the choir here, the people that listen to the podcast, and of course the people that we're listening to yours, they totally understand it. But of course, getting that message across. But again, that's part of what you're trying to do here is, give the leaders in the organization that information they need in order to get the resources from them. Yeah,
strategy 2, I think we touched on it, was finding, hiring, and keeping the best. Yeah. And so it's not just I work really hard to find the best, I pay them a lot and they stay. It's why are they staying? Yeah. What makes them stay? Why are they leaving? What can we fix? How do we really improve that entire employee journey? Yeah. And sometimes that journey may be, it's not a good fit. It's time for you to move on. But hopefully,
or making sure that you don't hire people just to fill because they're breathing and have a heartbeat.
Yes. Yes. And so, I think that plays into a lot of what we talked about. And then strategy 3, that focused on compensation, recognition, and rewards. And that's really just, what are we doing in our organization to reward people? What are we recognizing? Are they tied to our values? Are they tied to our business objectives? We often kind of put them in separate buckets. Are you a good performer? Here's your raise for the year. Yeah. Are you a good performer? Here's a spot bonus, or here's an award at the company meeting. But are we aligning that program with where we're wanting to take the organization? Are we aligning that program with who we are? So that an employee knows I'm just as able to be recognized for living out the values of our company than I am for being a top performer. Yeah. I said this earlier too, and I think it applies. Are you value-based? And the best way to know it is, if your values are only posted on the wall, you're probably not value-based. You need to be able to live those values in the hall. Yeah. Right? Not just posted on the wall, but live them in the hall. Are you actually encouraging your employees to live in a way, to behave in a way that it's drawing them together, it's building them up, because you're rewarding it, you're recognizing them? Yeah. Number 5 was about employee performance improvement. I think we kind of already touched on that, right? It's how you upskill them. It's how you manage that. You can't tell someone they're doing a good job or a bad job if you don't even have the basic fundamentals of HR in place. If you don't have job descriptions and handbooks, it's hard to tell someone they weren't doing their job. Right. And updated and current and something that's looked at on a regular basis. Absolutely. But even a job description, I think there's risk there to say we spent a whole year, we got all of our job descriptions, outlined and written and saved, and that process is in place. Well, that's the bare minimum. That's exactly right. That's the bare minimum. You want employees to go beyond that. Yeah. You want employees to give you an extra level of discretionary effort, where they say, if you can build trust and implement trust, then I'm going to take my job description to the next level. I'm going to do beyond what you've asked me. And so I think it's it's critical when you think about employee improvement that sometimes it's the little things that get overlooked or taken advantage of. Well, I got it in place, so that must be good enough. No, there might be more to that. There might be more to just having a job description. It's how do we then motivate them and inspire them and encourage them to go beyond just that description. Sure. Number 6 is employee administration and technology. This is just what tools do you have in place? How difficult is it for someone to enroll or update 401k or benefits, or I had a mid-season change to my dependents, or I moved. How do I update my address or my emergency contact information? And that used to be a differentiator. Yeah. There was a time when that kind of technology was, well, that company's got it going. They're and now it's an expected. It's a hygiene. Yeah, right. Wait, what do you mean you can't do that? Like, I have to sit on hold at a call center and try and update that information, or find out what doctors I can go to or what specialists. And so being mindful of those technologies, I think, is critical. I also like to take off the HR technology part on this and just say, what are your technologies in your organization? Do you have broken technologies? Do you have broken processes where your front line is saying to the new hire, oh, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. Oh, it doesn't work like that. And you have all these workarounds. That's exposing you to risks and liabilities when you start to do manual stuff. And And one of the critical parts, and it's even one of the strategies, is liability and compliance.
Yeah.
And if you've got broken systems, you've got old technologies, you're putting yourself at risk, and you're also disengaging your employee because they're frustrated. Why do I have to use this tool day in and day out? I got all these manual processes. This isn't worth it. This is too much. And so, being really mindful of, is it time to spend a little bit of money internally and update some processes and some systems so that our people can get the most out of them?
Especially since there's so many options available out there right now to it. And I know that full well because we keep switching them. Which, by the way, hint to everybody else, don't keep switching your systems. But I think that's been the challenge over the last couple of years is there are a lot of different competitors out there. And as systems evolve, hopefully you find the one that's going to evolve with you. But it doesn't always work that way. But yeah, very good point.
Strategy 7 was human capital and mergers and acquisitions. And this one really focuses almost a message to the CEOs and leaders of these organizations to say, if that's your growth strategy, what are you doing to make sure that you're shored up in your organization, but also the companies that are your targets, that they're shored up? Because a lot of times we look at great sales results, we look at positive profit and loss statements and cash flows and say, numbers are all there. This is great. And what we don't realize is we've got disgruntled employees. Yeah. We've got EEOC claims that haven't been dealt with correctly. And so we may be buying ourselves into a lot of headaches in the next year or two. As well, is there a culture alignment? Yeah. Because you're about to take people that you really love, that love you, that are in your organization, that have dedicated years possibly to your company, and you're about to merge them with strangers. And what's the promotion process at that point? Whose values win? Are you adopting yours and pushing them into the new organization, or are you taking new organizations and bringing them in? What is leadership structure? How do you decide who takes what role? And so there is a lot of, I think, overlooked opportunity on the HR side. When you're in this world, oftentimes it's, let's look at the business case. Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at, we're going to grow our regional geographic reach. We're going to grow our market share. We're going to grow, maybe we're purchasing into new services. We're expanding our offerings. And they miss, what is that going to do to the people? And if you are too disruptive to that process and don't have a good enough plan in place, you're going to miss out on all of those great numbers that your business case stated.
Well, and in the vernacular of an ASC, the average ASC, when we're talking about acquisitions, often our ASCs, the people that are listening to the podcast, they're being acquired by one of the bigger organizations. And there's a real danger at that point of losing the people that you've had a long time, let alone, the bringing that corporate structure in there to oversee that.
Absolutely. And that's what I saw today, when I was presenting. When I kind of touched on that piece, there was a lot more heads that said, we're nodding to the getting acquired part versus the
acquiree,
being
acquirer,
the acquirer. And so absolutely. Yeah. And I think that leads us to nicely into strategy 8 was organization and leadership. We talked a little bit about this even before we turned the mics on today. Yeah. Your leadership really, really has a lasting impact on the organization. And if you're not a leadership group that's getting together and being purposeful and mindful about where you're taking the organization, right? Like we mentioned it. When you're looking at compensation, it's not just about paying the most, but it's what behaviors do we want to see our employees have? And how are we rewarding that? How are we building that into our compensation plans? Yeah. And so it really requires leaders to get away and work on the business, not just working in the business. And And again, different industries, this may look different, right? It may be that in this area, your CEO's more of the business side. They're on the business and not in it because it's not their specialty, and they leave the daily operations to those that have the specialties, the certifications, the trainings, the degrees. But I would then even challenge that level of leadership. Find a way of getting out and saying, how can I look at the business and fine tune some of these things that are being expected from us from a business perspective that are getting that kind of muddied and convoluted in the actual daily operations.
Well, and that's a very important thing for our listeners. So many of our leaders in the surgery centers are being called in to actually cover for employees that you don't have right now, doing things that you used to have other employees doing. And you're so right, you get bogged down in that detail, that minutia. You got away from, you were promoted out of that, and now you're getting dragged into it, which means that you're losing that ability to look at the big picture and to think about future growth, which is it's eventually going to catch up with you.
And we actually, that was a great point, and we saw that trend go both directions in the pandemic. Because what we saw is a lot of those leaders that had been, as you put it, promoted out, realized we're facing things in our business we've never had to face before. And so a lot of them, if they were good, rolled up their sleeves and got back in the business and said, how do I get back to the tactical?
Right.
How do I look at what our business needs? How do I look at what our employees need? How do I look at what our customers need and make those changes and adjustments? And the organizations that made those changes and adjustments are still here and they're strong.
Correct.
Those that didn't, they struggled or they failed.
Or they're continuing to struggle right now and are on the verge.
And the other thing that I'll add is then we saw the other trend, and that is as organizations were coming out of all of the strict impact or significant impact of the pandemic, you had leaders that were forgetting how to get back into the strategic part of it,
absolutely.
and they were still stuck in the tactical.
And
so I think right now you're seeing a lot of businesses that their horizon isn't as far as it used to be because they're really just looking at the tactical piece. And there's great opportunity moving forward for them to kind of roll their sleeves down a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to empower again the people that I had empowered before. That middle level leadership to say, I don't need to run it anymore. I'm going to go back and look at the 5-year horizon or the 3-year horizon, and you're going to come back into that role. But until you get headcount, which is a real challenge, you may still have kind of that middle level of leadership that's kind of doing dual, where one day they're rolling up their sleeves and diving into it, and the other day they're back to kind of leading and nurturing and growing their people and their divisions. I think we're to the last one. Well, the strategy 9, and then we've got a bonus one. Strategy 9 is employee communications, and this one really it's all encompassing. I talked about it earlier today. We hire great people. A lot of times we say our people are our greatest competitive advantage. Well, I wouldn't go that far because I think your competitors are probably also hiring great people, right?
Probably from you.
Right. In today's market, absolutely. But what are we doing after we hire them? And when we leave employees in the dark, when we leave employees where they're not able to really engage and put in their all, we're missing out, as I mentioned earlier, on that full potential. Where we can get the most out of them, and our organization can get the most out of them, and our organization can get the most out of itself. And so, when it comes to employee communication, it's how are we communicating? How often are we communicating? And what are we communicating? Are we only focused on business results, or are we only focused on calling out the problems and saying this needs to fix, this needs to fix? Or are we saying, here is our values. Here's opportunities for growth. Here's an opportunity that we want to give a shout out that Susie did a great job, or Tom did a great job, and they really lived out our value and highlighted this, and we want to call that out and recognize them. What are we communicating is just as critical as to how and when. And I think a lot of organizations, this was a big struggle in the early years of the pandemic, if we're far enough along to say early years. But when it really kicked off and we started having to communicate different and work different, what we communicated was different, how we communicated was different. And I think it's just a good opportunity to kind of step back and say, what is the message? How are we getting it out there? How often are we getting it out there? And then listening. And I think that's also another piece of communication. We often just think it's top down.
Very well said.
We can learn so much, and I'm sure, like you said, we're preaching to the choir. I'm sure the choir's like, I couldn't sing any louder. Like, somebody hear my praises.
Well, but for our leaders too, making sure that those conversations that you have are conversations. Staff meetings should not be me telling my staff everything. It should be providing time, because you can do that in an email. You can do that in other ways.
Yes.
Save that face time for that opportunity for a dialogue to occur.
And what great opportunity to get the insights that you don't have access to.
Yeah.
When you're in the ivory tower and you're a C-suite of a few that are so far removed from the customer, you miss out on so many opportunities. And that plays the whole way down, right? There will always be more frontline employees than there are managers, middle managers. There'll always be more middle managers than there are executives, more executives than all the way up, right? There will always be that ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And we miss out on the learning that can happen, like you said, in those conversations where you can say, hey, I have some thoughts, but I want to bring up a challenge that we're seeing and just see what you guys think about it. And listening and letting your people know that you're willing to listen. That doesn't mean you have to do it, but you may be able to fine tune your plan based on the feedback you were able to gather from your people.
So you got a bonus.
Yeah, I've got a bonus.
There you go.
So in the book, Taking Care of Your People, there's a 10th strategy, and it's faith at work, faith and optimism, and really I'll touch on just the 3 bullet points that I think accentuate it, and it's an entrepreneurial faith, and it's an entrepreneurial faith that, as is described, it's a rush of unexplainable optimism about the future that's motivated by more than just a personal desire for wealth. And that's a lot of words, but if you kind of slow that down and think about it, it's optimism and excitement to do something more than just make money. And we are a mission-driven organization. We help businesses succeed so communities prosper. It's large. It can mean so many different things, but I think when you unite people behind a greater purpose, you're gonna get through the harder times easier, and you're gonna get more out of them in the good times.
Well, and it's such important in a healthcare organization. That's exactly what we do. I mean, it's a natural for us.
Yeah, it goes on then to say too, there's something else that electrifies the dream and churns inside the dreamer. The tantalizing prospect of creating something from nothing en route to building an enterprise.
I love it.
And, again, I think that's even just a fraction of the way we could capture, like you said, when you are intrinsically motivated, when there is a passion and a love for what you do, you'll give it your all. But that can quickly be killed. And so, you have to be mindful. It goes back to the leadership. It goes back to how you're maximizing your people, how you're minimizing risks, how you're streamlining. They are so interrelated that one can relieve the other and impact or emphasize another. And so when you're really thinking about those 3 areas and how they interplay together, you have a great opportunity to increase and build that hope. And that's really what this is saying is, how are you playing into that? How are you being mindful of that? How are you being purposeful? Are you nurturing hope and gaining confidence in your product, in your people, in your organization? Do you have a resolve and a determination to push through distractions and limitations? And businesses, I think, over the last couple of years, really found a lot of distractions. And those that had that resolve, had that entrepreneurial spirit and faith, I think they moved through. Not necessarily unscathed, but they could take their strikes, they could take their beatings, and they could rise up above it. And they're stronger and better for it. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll take a breath.
I know, and we're running out of time here, unfortunately. But
we just talk about you should be ready for the next pandemic, whatever it is. Right? If you didn't learn from this, then you didn't do your job. We should be ready for how we communicate, how we motivate, how we inspire, how we stop and listen to people. How we work to encourage them and build on them, and if we aren't able to do that, then we missed a great opportunity that's a silver lining in what's been a lot of challenging times over the last couple of years.
So in our last couple minutes here, can you quickly just talk about the advantages of using a PEO?
And you'll see quickly, I'm not a salesperson at this point, but I really think that if you have a dedicated HR staff, they would probably tell you a lot of their time is wasted on doing just the trivial, doing the tactical, making sure that payrolls are run or time offs are processed or timesheets are processed, and it's really administrative. you are missing out on the opportunity to really build a comprehensive human capital strategy. Now, in our organization, we focus on that. That's one of the things we help with is that. But I think even if you've got dedicated HR people, they probably have those skills. And we can take a lot of the mundane, the processes, and streamline those and give you access to better benefits, better systems, better tools. And particularly, I'll give a disclaimer to why ours over someone else. We really were built on a service model. So where others will tout an advantage of streamlined systems and processes and technologies, well, what happens when the technology goes down? What happens when the system breaks? You're really left.
What happens when you have a turnover?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, especially during the pandemic, we lost a lot of. I mean, in our own company, we've gone through 3 human resources people in the last in the last 9 months.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's probably one of the biggest advantages that you would have. You wouldn't have that
there
problem.
is someone at the other end of the phone based on whatever challenge you need, or just our general liaison, right? That's going to say, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you when you're struggling to hire. I'm going to help you when you're struggling to grow and train. I'm going to help you when you're struggling to let someone go. I'm going to be there to help minimize your risks, to help maximize your people, and help streamline your processes. And I think when you turn a lot of your non-core business activities over to someone who specializes in it, it frees up your resources and your abilities to focus really on the core of what your business does. And that's what we do. We help companies run better, grow faster, and make more money by helping to really allow them to leverage their core strengths.
And I think that's where we're going to have to end it.
Awesome.
It's been great. I so much enjoyed this, and I think our listeners got a lot out of it. So thanks for your time.
I appreciate this opportunity, and it's great getting to meet with you and work with you.
Absolutely. So for our last session, we had an opportunity to speak with the executives from the New Jersey Association. Sheila McAteer, who is the immediate past president, and she's with Virtua. And she talked about the association and, what's been going on with the organization over the past year. And with her was Joseph Simonetta, who is with Public Strategies Impact, who does a lot of their work with the state government as well as the Department of Health. So let's listen to this interview. So this is John Goehle. I'm here at the New Jersey State Association meeting in June of 2022, and I'm here with Sheila McAteer, who is she works for Virtua Health, but she's the current president, newly re-elected president of the New Jersey Association, and also with us is Joe Simonetta, who is with Public Strategies Impact. Right? Did I say that?
That's correct.
And which you basically do your government affairs work, right?
That's right.
So I'm going to start with you, Sheila. This is you're starting your second year. The second term?
So this is actually my third term.
Okay.
But it's my first year as president. I started as just a board member, as secretary, and then I went to vice president, and then I am now president. We did elect 3 new members for the board, and I am one of those. We will be electing the officers at our next in-person meeting, which will be in July.
Wonderful.
So the 2 positions that will be open will be the president and vice president. So we'll see if that continues for myself or somebody new. Either way, the board will work very collaborative together and work for the members and ensure that we have great communication for them and educational items. So, however that works, whether it's me or not, I will work diligently for the membership.
Well, I got to say, on behalf of the podcast and me personally as a speaker here, I've always enjoyed working with New Jersey. You guys are great. You put together a great conference. I know it's not easy. We do a lot of work in New York, so your neighbors, so we know how difficult it is to put together these conferences, but you do a fantastic job. We're also a vendor here, and you've been very great for all of us. So
speaking of the annual event, I do want to give out a big shout out to Bonnie, because without her leadership on the committee, none of this would occur. This was her original idea 12 years ago, and she's been working at this every year. And the programs, the prizes, everything is just awesome. And a lot of that has to do with her leadership and the committee. I don't want to leave out anybody on the committee as well. So it's, I'm just grateful to have that.
Well, and I do want to say on behalf of the vendors, too, this has been probably the best vendor experience we've had in the last couple months. It's tough getting back, you know what I mean? And a lot of, you got a very good attendance here, and you got a very loyal group of people here. Talk a little bit about why you got a good group. You provide a lot of great benefits. I get daily emails from New Jersey Association. Talk a little bit about what is the benefit of being a member here.
So the benefit, one of them is, which I'm going to let Joe speak to in a little bit, is the ability to have somebody in the legislative world and be able to bring forth what we as an association and what it benefits a ASC, as a surgery center in New Jersey. Along with that, we have a great communication with the Department of Health. We are doing quarterly meetings, but beyond that, we could make a phone call, an email, a text, and get any answer to anything that is needed. Along with that, anything that we find that is updated information, we have a news to know. We put that out on a weekly basis and ensure that all of the members have that updates. Right. Along with the educational items that we do provide at our quarterly meetings and then this conference. So there's a lot, and then you have a lot of networking. So with the amount of vendors that we have, we're up to 50. Any member could come and we could ensure that they can meet the right people to help them within their operations.
Yeah, and I will say that too for the vendor listeners out there. We have quite a number of them. This is a good experience. They treat us very well as vendors here. We've been a vendor for years, and it's very important that you understand that there's a real good opportunity to interact with the people, and the people that come through to the tables have been very attentive to us. So, the pandemic, of course, had a huge impact on the industry, and New York and New Jersey, both states, the state associations did not step back. They jumped in wholeheartedly. Talk about some of the lessons just quickly. I know you have limited time here, but some of the lessons you learned from it and how that's changed your organization a bit.
So I will tell you that when the pandemic did happen, when we were in that emergency state, we opened up all of our communication to all of the surgery centers. So that way the Department of Health had a line of communication so we can ensure that all of the surgery centers were adhering to the EDs or the EOs, whichever they were. And then during that, we have still continued to make sure that we keep that line of communication, and any changes or any items that have to do with testing, or how often should they do things, what does the Cali score mean, and when they're in high, how many times do they have to test? So we continue to do that, and that's kind of been the biggest change I feel that I've seen, is that the line of communication from the Department of Health has gotten greater, and they really look at us as a resource to give information to our surgery centers.
Right.
So it's very helpful for them as well.
We have a number of centers in New Jersey, and we as an organization rely upon answers from the state association too. It's very quick to respond. Anything else you want to say about what's going on with the state association?
So I will also tell you that we have coming up in wintertime or fall an infection control program that will be accepted by the Department of Health for the education for the RN infection control coordinator at the facility level.
Right. Not the consultant, but the actual.
But
right.
Everybody needs to have an RN that oversees the infection control on site at the facility, and this will satisfy their educational needs from the Department of Health.
As well as the ongoing needs, not just the initial, but also the ongoing needs. Right.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Sheila. I know you have to run right now because you're pretty much introducing everybody, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, John, for
Thanks.
having me.
My pleasure. So, Joe, thank you for joining us. I always love talking about legislative issues. That's sarcasm, by the way. But, just like the other states, we always have this interesting conversation when we're visiting these state associations to see the differences in the different states and the priorities that are going on. So tell me what's going on in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, you just heard from Sheila, and I've got to say the association really stepped up on the governmental end through the pandemic, and we were very integral in making sure that the industry not only survived but to continue to prosper, even though there were severe regulations. And quite frankly, it's what we did before the pandemic, and that's what we do after the pandemic. We just are fresh from amending a bill on the elimination of surgical smoke, a mandate to eliminate surgical smoke. It seems to be a nationwide issue.
Sponsored by AORN. I know we've been working with them too.
Right, exactly. And while we didn't want to oppose the bill, there were certain aspects of the bill that were burdensome to centers that actually do not produce surgical smoke. So we got an amendment. That's one of the things we do. we don't allow these things to get out of hand until it gets to the department or it gets to the executive branch. So we're very active. This is an extremely active group, and we push out this information. The board of directors, the government affairs team's excellent here. Our legislature is about to recess for the summer. They'll adopt a budget. We have a requirement that we have a balanced budget, unlike the federal government and other states. We have to have a balanced budget by June 30th. It looks like the budget will be adopted sometime around the 23rd. In the meantime, we've been working on a bunch of issues. One of the issues is the elimination of a collaborative practice with APNs. We've been involved in that. It's been difficult because the physician community still thinks that the collaborative practice is important. There's a bill that's up in committee on Monday, capping fees for medical record requests and reproducing those. We have been involved in that and making some amendments on that. We're still involved in trying to fine-tune the arbitration process on out-of-network issues where an ASC or a patient finds themselves in a situation where, unbeknownst to them, they got an out-of-network procedure, and there was a law that this organization was very integral part of adopting that needed some tweaking on the arbitration process, extending the period, the reporting, the necessary activity in the whole arbitration process, and then reporting out what the decision was and what the decision was based on.
So you provided the feedback to the department so that they could understand how do you actually operationalize something.
Exactly. And when the department understood that, they said, well, there are limitations in the current law, so you need to go back to the legislature and get it changed. So we're in the legislative process now, getting that tweak done. And that should be on the governor's desk before they recess. And we're also working with the Senate President, luckily, to have somebody with that kind of authority to deal with prior authorization and making sure that the evaluation entities for the carriers and prior authorization is not a burden, and that it's only used when necessary and that it's transparent. Anything in the horizon that you might see coming down? I mean, there's been a lot of talk over time about the rules with regard to infection control consultants, having to be certified as a CIC as opposed to some of the industry-specific ones. Yeah, and that conversation is happening more and more at the federal level, not necessarily at the state level. But oftentimes when these things start to happen at the federal level, state legislators start to promulgate their own rules and regulations, which quite frankly is bothersome because they'll let it play out at the federal level, let everybody know what's going on state by state. New Jersey's a border state. We cross over borders to buy a loaf of bread. So, we depend upon the federal process to help in that. Well, and also to avoid things like the No Surprises Act, which, has many different versions both at the state and the federal level, which... And we're dealing with that now, too, because the No Surprises Act is in contrast to some of the things that we pass through on our out-of-network arbitration process. I appreciate your time, Joe. This is great. Again, the State Association does a great job for its members. It is important that you as members out there be on top of this type of information. And really the only way that you can do that is by, maintaining a membership here where you get the news on before it goes, and also to be part of that process of providing feedback to the Department of Health and to the legislature. Yeah, I think it's one of the key benefits to be on the cutting edge of knowing exactly what's coming out from the government. Absolutely. Thanks so much. Sure. Thank you.
This episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is sponsored by Surgical Information Systems, Trivalence, and Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. Surgical Information Systems provides cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable insights. Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies is the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, visit our website at ascpodcast.com. This podcast is an educational and operational tool and is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for all rules, regulations, and standards that an ambulatory surgery center must meet. The advice provided should not be considered as, nor does it constitute, legal advice or opinion. When reviewing specific situations involving legal and regulatory issues, attorneys and other professionals should be consulted. This has been a production of Eden Group Development. All rights are reserved. If you are interested in advertising or sponsoring the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, please email us at info@ascpodcast.com. We would love to hear your questions and comments. Please email us at comments@ascpodcast.com.